Okay, boys and girls, we're ready to start. Let me see who is here today. We have Lynn, we got Lucas, we have, let's see, Zozo. I think that's it. We don't, oh, there's one more. One, two, three, four. Eric. Eric is here. All right, we have five. Um, yeah, we're missing a few people, but it's okay. We will continue. Oh, I think some people are joining now. Okay, we got almost the full boat. All right. Anyway, so we've been talking about Rome, of course. That's what this course is about. And if you recall, I told you that there are some events that are much more important than others, and that are really worthwhile understanding and remembering um, in order for you to understand what the Roman Empire was all about and where it was headed and and what was going on with it and all that stuff. And certainly the kings, the royal period, the kingdom period of Rome is an important period, right? The seven kings of Rome. And then uh, came the Roman, rather, after the excuse me, after the monarchy. Oops, sorry, I got the hiccups. After the monarchy came the republic, right? And we need to understand the difference between a monarchy and a republic, and the fact that while in the monarchy they did have a senate, but the senate was very weak. It was a very weak senate, and the king really held the most of the power. When the republic was instituted, it swapped, it switched. The uh, the Senate became more powerful. The head of the state um, was less powerful, and in fact, a lot of times they would have two of them running the state at once, and they would only do it for a year, maybe a little bit longer than a year. And what that tells you is that the Senate was really calling all of the shots. Um, and they handled the budget, they handled wars, they handled buildings, and this is a period of time when Rome really grew exponentially, right? I remember we talked about the Etruscans, that they were very sophisticated people. They were north of Rome. Remember we talked about what SPQR meant. In other words, the Senate for the people, right? Roman Senate and the people. Roman Senate being very important for the people. And we talked about the Republic in general, how how the Republic handled itself and all of that stuff. The Gauls, these were enemies of Rome throughout the time that Rome was Rome. In fact, we were watching Attila, the Hun. We were watching on YouTube. We were watching what do you call it? A documentary on Attila the Hun, who invaded Rome and managed to break through around the year 400, 450 AD. Um, but he was just one of the many Huns, or one of the many people that came from that Gaul area, which included Hungary, it included Germany, and north of Rome, north of the Italian peninsula, right? North of the Italian peninsula. Um, and this is the Gauls. And then the other event that I want you to remember are the three Punic Wars. The three Punic Wars are very important. Um, the first Punic War it was just a loss to Carthage. Carthage got their butts kicked. They got the rear ends kicked. But that cost the uh, uh, the punitive nature of the win by Rome. In other words, Rome required Carthage to pay them reparations, to pay them money after Carthage lost the war. That in itself brought upon the Second War. Um, and in the Second War, Hannibal became the hero, although he lost Hannibal and his elephants. So remember that Hannibal and his elephants. Um, Hannibal managed to, what he did was he went to what is now Spain, and he conquered some of the area around Spain. Uh, and as you know, the Roman Empire was heavily invested in Spain, right? They had a lot of colonies there. So Hannibal beat those colonies and worked his way around the back end, um, over the Alps. And he came over the Alps with his elephants. Unfortunately, there were two reasons why he was not really able to conquer the city of Rome, although he stayed in the Italian empire, in the Italian peninsula, for a number of years, just being a nuisance, being a nuisance. He would go and, and rob from people, and he would do different things. But there were two reasons why he was not able to do much, or at least be able to conquer the city of Rome. And number one was that by the time he made it all around the Alps and he made it into Rome, he had lost a lot of elephants. A lot of elephants had died in the travel, in the trek, uh, in the trip. And he also lacked what was called war machines. War machines. In other words, his main source of battle, of strategy, was the elephants. But the elephants alone cannot break through a city. You need machines. And machines are things like catapults, towers that you can climb up through and maybe breach a wall, um, catapults that can throw fire. They would take hay and make a big ball out of it, and they would put some oil in there for it to catch fire. And they would put fire, and they would throw that big ball of fire at a city and burn it. He lacked all of that. He didn't have the machines, what was called the war machines, and his elephants. Many of his elephants died. Um, so anyway, so after the Second Punic War came the Third Punic War, and this was by then Rome had pretty much had it with with Carthage. They wanted to wipe Carthage out of off the map and take over, and they did. They went into Carthage and they destroyed it. They not only destroyed Carthage, but they took over. Um, they just took over Carthage. So Carthage, which is no longer independent at that point, and Rome ran the show. So these are the events up till now, anyway, that I want you to remember. It is hard to remember specific people, like, for instance, Scipio, and things like that. Um, if you ever, and this is a short class, we don't really have the luxury of having a one entire class of an entire college semester or something like that, um, where you can, where I can give you, a lot of lectures. So I gotta kind of uh, go not super deep, just to give you an idea of what's happening, so that when you do, if you ever decide to take Roman history as a course, you have a little bit better understanding of of what Rome is all about. And also, there's so many movies that are always being created about Rome. But movies, a lot of times, they give you a snapshot of an era, of a period of time in Rome. They don't really go deep into it. You know, they might tell you about one gladiator, one famous gladiator, or one famous emperor, or something like that. But that's only a snapshot within a much larger picture of what Rome was and how Rome evolved, uh, over the centuries. So that it doesn't really give you, a lot. But but the other thing that I want you to understand is what these civilizations contributed to the world, right? What these civilizations contributed to the world. Um, and perhaps, if we look back at the very beginning, and I don't know which of you attended my Egyptian class, uh, maybe some of you, maybe none, uh, but ancient Egypt um, was not as influential as the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire. Uh, Egypt was pretty much self-contained. They got into a couple of squabbles with the Nubians, for instance, down south of where they were. They fought a few wars, but for the most part, if anything, Egypt was taken over by other empires. The Greek Empire took over, the Roman Empire took over. The Waikos, which was kind of like a Jewish tribe, took over. They were, if anything, Egypt didn't do stuff to the world did stuff to Egypt. But on the other hand, just on the other side of Egypt was the Greek Empire, and Greece. The Greek Empire contributed a lot to Western thought, to Western civilization, to the world in general. And the contributions from the Greeks were logic, a way of thinking, a way of solving problems through dialogue, through discourse, through thinking, um, philosophy, science. All of that stuff came from Greece. As the Greek Empire waned, as it lost influence in the world, uh, the Romans took over. And the Romans actually looked at Greece as kind of like the grandfather that we love, that we, admire. And they adopted a lot of things from Greece. They adopted some of the philosophical thoughts. They adopted, actually even the Senate. They took the Senate, which Greece had, and they perfected the Senate, or at least to the degree that Rome liked it to be, in a way that Rome liked it to be. Mythology was adapted. Many things, gods and things like that. But then the Roman Empire began its own way, its own creation. Uh, and what the Roman Empire gave us, especially in the West, was government, politics, government, um, military might, military strategy, uh, a paid army, an army that became a professional army, rather than like the Gauls, who were mercenaries for the most part, and who would join the army of any one of these Attila or whoever it was, so that they could go and plunder They could go and rob and plunder and just create mayhem because that's how they could enrich themselves. They would then take whatever they plundered from these different nations back to their home. Uh, that was not the case with Rome. Rome created a professional army, and the Roman Senate dressed all of them the same. They all looked the same, like today. Today they have a uniform, armies have a uniform. Back then, the Roman army was one huge unit that dressed the same. They managed to uh, not normalize, but standardize, I should say, standardize weapons. So there were several weapons that would be mass produced for the army, and they would all have the same weapons, right? That in itself, you might not see the utility or the use of weapons that are the same, uh, but but then when you realize that a soldier can train with one weapon and learn it really well, if his weapon breaks, he can grab the weapon from a dead soldier, one of his comrades, and use it to defend himself and to fight. And not only that, they would become very proficient at that one particular weapon, at that one particular weapon. And that knowledge could be passed on then from one soldier to another. So now you would have like a sergeant at arms in the army that trains the conscripts, right? That trains the soldiers and teaches them how to swing a sword and how to do things. So they standardized the military. They standardized their army, and this was very important around that time. This is something that Rome gave us. Rome gave us buildings. They were the builders. They built roads that crisscrossed all over Europe. They built the aqueduct system, which we're going to talk about later in class. And the aqueduct system is a pipe that runs miles and miles and miles, but up high instead of underground. So it would be kind of like a bridge. And then up over the top, there would be a way for the water to move. And they would always go from high to low so that the water would follow gravity and move around, right? Um, so they did all of that. They gave us the toilet, the toilet. They gave us plumbing. Uh, Rome had plumbing, and the feces and the human waste would get washed away somewhere else. Um, you know, so Rome, they were the builders. They gave us, politics. They gave us military. Um, it was they were incredibly impactful, uh, and they were a contributor of many things, especially to the Western world, but certainly to the rest of the world. So that's so we're up into the Punic War, um, and they and as you see, as you when you um, after this class, you're going to get the entire PowerPoint. You're getting the PowerPoint little bits and pieces as we cover it. Um, and I do encourage you read it right after the class. Take a peek at it. But after the class, what I'm providing you here with this PowerPoint is a very extensive um, and very detailed history of Rome that you can use, you know, forever. You can use it later on in, if you're taking a Roman course in high school, college, whatever, because I'm giving you quite a lot of, giving you 159 pages of uh, of a of a document. We can't cover everything because, again, we have limited time to cover everything. But what I want to sort of tell you are the important things, the important areas, the areas that Rome either fought against, uh, Rome conquered, some of the important people. We will talk about some of the important people. But there's a lot of other details that, unfortunately, you have to, you have to read on your own, and you'll have to do it. And you can do it here. You can do it with this PowerPoint. It makes it nice and easy for you. It gives you pictures and, and all of that stuff. But certainly Rome not only Rome had two sets of antagonists, right? People that they would fight against uh, in one way or another. And that was number one, uh, neighbors of Rome. Now, think of it this way, that Rome um, lived in a very tough neighborhood, in a very tough neighborhood. This piece of land right here is smack in the middle of Europe uh, at a time when resources would dwindle. Uh, there would be a drought and farming would take a hit. Uh, and as populations grew, they needed elbow room. They needed elbow room. And for those of you that were watching the documentary about Attila, one thing that one of the narrators said, which is very true, and that is that you either conquered or you were going to get conquered. You either took an active approach, an aggressive approach, and took the initiative, or somebody was going to do that to you. In fact, Rome learned that from the Gauls, because way back, I think around 150 BC or 200 BC, a Gaul tribe made it all the way into Rome and forced Rome to give them gold in order for them to leave, right? So it was kind of highway robbery that they that they did on Rome. And Rome at that point said, this stuff ain't going to happen to us anymore. This is not going to happen to us. They fought back, and they fought the Gauls back to their land. And then that was the turning point. That was that watershed moment in which Rome said, we ain't going to play this game. We're not going to allow anybody to come in here and mess with us. We're going to mess with them first. We're going to take the fight to them first, right? So Rome had areas, had antagonists, had nations and groups of people that they fought against in order to take over those lands. And then they had others that was the other way around. They had others who wanted to do harm to Rome and who wanted to take the initiative against Rome. And there were many. Macedonia, there was a whole, in the Punic War, Carthage. So when you're reading um, the story of Rome, it is one military battle after another. And that's basically the best way to describe it. In fact, emperors, once it became an empire, leaders, one before they became an empire, even during the kingdom, um, the monarchy, leaders were not worth their weight in salt unless they were military leaders, unless they brought home the bacon, so to speak, unless they could go into another land and steal their gold grab slaves, bring slaves back to Rome. When they did that, when leaders did that, they were admired. They were admired. And case in point is Caesar, right? Caesar, who was part of a triumvirate, and we're gonna talk about all of that. Uh, he got into a civil war with Pompey, and he had Pompey killed. Um, when Caesar came back into Rome, because he was out in his military campaigns, killing people and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, taking over land. When he came back to Rome, even though he had had his partner in the triumvirate killed, one of his partners, Pompey, he came back a hero into Rome. He came back a hero. Uh, People admired him, and people wanted him to become an emperor, right? They didn't want him to become a someone who answered to the Senate, as it had been up till then. The Senate ultimately had the last word, even though that power kept on moving more towards the emperor. It is part of human nature, right? They see a group of people making decisions and they can't identify any of those people, right? Oh, the Senate. Who cares about the Senate? One guy, though, one person does something great, and it's easier for people to identify with that one great person, right? And that was the case with Caesar. However, unfortunately for Caesar, for Julius Caesar, the Senate knew that he was a danger to the Republic, and they killed him, right? They killed him. Brutus led a group of senators, excuse me, and stabbed Caesar to death. And that caused another civil war. So Rome had a series of external campaigns in which they would go after countries, take over countries, take their gold, take slaves, bring them back to Rome, and they also had a series of civil wars. They had a series of civil wars. Each and every one of those civil wars can be a class in itself, and that's why we can't go into everything because it's very, very difficult. We just don't have the time. I mean, think of it this way: there are people out there with PhDs in Roman history, so that's how much information, how much stuff there is to this. Um, but uh, but that's what was going on in Rome at the time, right? You either had civil wars or you had external wars, and each and every one of the civil wars, the best way to describe them was people did not get along with each other. They did not have a system of checks and balances that were very well defined, right? Like in many uh, democracies throughout the world, right? Um, and even the places that are not democratic, uh, they have some sort of a way in which power can be centralized. And that wasn't the case with Rome. Power was not centralized, and consequently, uh, greed, jealousy, um, things like that would come into play, and leaders would fight, and they should have gone to the arena, to the gladiator arena, and fight it out between the two of them. That should have been the way to do it, right? But whenever they fought it out, they did it with their armies. Each and every one of these leaders, because they were expected to go out and bring home the bacon, go out and steal and plunder other areas, they needed they needed an army in order to do that. So they had an army. Caesar had an army that he took with him to wherever he went, and so did Pompey, and so did Mark Antony, and so did everybody. Um, they all had their armies, and then what they would do was they would end up in a civil war. Just as simple as that. Um, Now, there's a mention here. Let me see what it says about mercantilism. Uh, Creating new economists. See, wait a minute. Let me see if this is something important. Yeah, and foreign dominance led to internal strife. Senators became rich at the province's expenses. This is the system, and this was another problem with Rome, and unfortunately, it's a problem that we in the world today that we still have, and that is that the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The rich have influence, the poor do not have influence, and the rich always look for ways to get involved in government. That that is just one of the things we see even today here in the United States. If you look at the Senate and the Congress, there's a bunch of business people that decide to run for office, and they become senators and Congress people. A lot of them are not, but there are a lot that are business people that are very wealthy business people. And you say to yourself, here's someone like the senator that we had in Georgia. Her name was Loeffler, and she was a billionaire, right? She owned her and her husband owned businesses. I don't know what kind of business they own, but she was a billionaire. And all of a sudden, she wants to become a senator. And you say to yourself, why does she want a job that pays $180,000 a year when she makes probably $190,000 a week with her job? Ah, the reason why is because she wants to make sure she influences government to benefit her, to benefit her, right? It's not about her serving people. And that's what all these business people do in government. They're not serving you, they're not serving me, they're serving themselves. They're serving themselves. Why does Purdue in Georgia want to become a senator? And he was a senator for a while. Now he lost. Purdue owns businesses all over the place. He's another billionaire, and he wanted to run for Senate. He became a senator for one term. And when he was a senator, all he did was vote for things for lower taxes. Yeah, of course. He's a business guy. He doesn't want to pay taxes, right? So he votes for lower taxes. He votes for things that benefited him, right? And that's across the board. And that goes back, unfortunately, that practice uh, of patricians, this patrician practice. The patricians were the privileged people that ended up in government, right? Uh, Versus the plebes, the plebeians, right? The plebeians were the people, the regular people, right? Um, so this practice of the patricians looking for ways for their wealthy, influential family to put them in government was it goes back to that period period of time. It goes back to that period of time. Now, Rome practiced a system called mercantilism, and mercantilism, they sort of invented it, sort of, but it was really used by England. And it's a system in which a country has colonies, right? So you had England that was over here, right? The island, and here was Europe, and then Europe goes all the way down. You got Africa, and you got India, and you got the Caribbean all the way the heck over here somewhere. And the Brits would go and colonize an area, right? Now, once they are once they made this area a colony, this area has resources, right? Maybe they have forests with wood. Maybe they can grow coffee beans. Maybe they have a fishing industry, right? So, but now the Brits are the bosses, right? They run this colony, right? This was the case with India and many others. So, and the United States, this is the reason why the war, uh, the American War, the War of Independence was fought. So now the Brits come in and they say, you are not allowed to do business with anybody but England. Right? You're not allowed to do business with anybody but England. So they would force this nation to sell them goods at very cheap prices. And they would sell them in return finished goods, right? This is back, with England, not, Rome did not have a manufacturing base, but they had other things that they could sell. So they would sell them finished goods at a high price. Consequently, there came a time around the 1700s and early 1800s in which England was unbelievably wealthy, Uh, and they had colonies all over the world. They had colonies just all over the world. They had colonies that they could do this mercantilistic way of doing business. It's called mercantilism. And no one else could trade with England. They would not trade with Italy. Italy would be down here. They would not trade with Italy unless Italy did something special. They would not trade with the Germans. They would not trade with the Dutch. They would not trade with anybody. They would only trade with their colonies. And their colonies could not trade with England. I mean, we could not trade with Italy. They could not trade. They had to trade with England only. So this is what's called an incestuous sort of relationship, right? Is a relationship which not only is it incestuous, but it's a relationship in which the people that are colonies are heavily uh, underprivileged, uh, and the people that are the colonizers are they're wealthy. They're very wealthy. The colony is terribly disadvantaged. The main colonizer is greatly advantaged, greatly advantaged. So that's what the word mercantilism means, in case you know, you want to know. Um, so anyway, so Rome had, Rome had its problems, had external enemies, had internal enemies. There was, they were all sorts of upheaval all the time going on. And the people that lived in the city of Rome had it pretty easy in comparison. But, you know, but it was, there was a lot of upheaval during the period of time that Rome was there. Um, so now let's go to another one of these uh, events that are important, and that is the first Roman civil war during the Republic. During the Republic, because before that, in the kingdom, in the monarchy, there were a lot of squabbles and uh, and a lot of fighting. But this was the first civil war during the Republic. And as you can see right here by this painting, you can see how the soldiers of Rome were, used the same equipment and the same uniforms. Even the shoes uh, were supposed to be the same. The armor, the shields, the knives, everything. they certainly professionalized the army. So the first Roman civil war during the Republic, this was also the first in a succession of several internal conflicts, which eventually led to the dissolution of the Roman Republic and establishment of Augustus Caesar as emperor. Now, remember that Augustus Caesar was a nephew of Caesar that Caesar adopted, Julius Caesar adopted, because he wanted Augustus to be his predecessor, to be someone that would follow in his steps. And when Caesar was assassinated, um, Augustus, there was another civil war, and that was the civil war between Brutus and Mark Antony. And eventually, Augustus chased Mark Antony into Egypt. Mark Antony had married, or at least gotten together with Cleopatra, had children with Cleopatra. And Augustus is the one that brought death to Mark Antony, even though Mark Antony committed suicide. But because of because of Augustus. Once Augustus had gotten rid of Mark Antony, he at that point became an emperor. And that's when Rome stopped being a republic and became an empire. And it's funny because things have gone backwards, right? Rome, after the empire, Rome became a monarchy again, in the early part of the 1900s. And then right after Second World War, that monarchy was eradicated. And now Rome, or Italy, is a republic again, right? Now it's a republic with a Senate and with a Congress and, a parliament. Actually, they have a parliament. It's the same thing, right? They have a parliament, they get a prime minister, they get, all that kind of stuff. So you can see that things in this world are kind of cyclical. If you want to understand, and this is why history is as important as it is, because if you want to understand today, and if you want to know what's going to happen tomorrow, study history. Humans don't change. We're still the same idiots that we were 20,000 years ago. It just, we don't change. We're just as idiotic as we were back then, and we do the same stupid things. So believe me, history will repeat itself many times over, right? Many times over. So anyway, let me go through the first Civil War, because these civil wars are somewhat important. I don't want to spend too much time in it. We only have about 20, 30 minutes to go. The first Civil War, rivalry of Marius and Sulla, these two characters over here. Gaius Marius, novus homo, right? The first in a family to serve in the Senate, who started his political career with the help of the powerful Metili family, soon became the leader of the Republic, holding the first of the 7 consulships. These guys they weren't called presidents, they weren't called emperors, they were called consuls. That was their actual title. An unprecedented number in 107 BC by arguing that his former patron, Quintus Caecilius Metellus Numidicus, was not able to defeat and capture the Numidian king Jugurtha. Marius then started his military reform. In his recruitment to fight Jugurtha, he levied the very poor in an innovation, and many landless men entered the army. This was the seed of securing loyalty of the army to the general in command. So again, as you can see, I mean, the underlying message is that the reality was that the Roman people, they actually liked, I mean, to me, it seems they like war. They like blood. If you went to the Colosseum, they would have mini wars in there, little tiny wars, and people would hack themselves to death. And the Romans would watch this, and they would just get all Google eyes over this. They loved it. They loved to see blood being spilled, and no leader in Rome uh, would have any influence on the people of Rome unless he was willing and able to go out and beat someone up, kill people, murder people, invade lands, fight against this guy and that guy. If you weren't able to do that, and you weren't able to do that well, um, you weren't going to succeed as a politician in Rome. Just as simple as that. Then the other jerk, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, was born into a poor family that used to be a patrician family. He had a good education, but became poor when his father died and left none of his will. Sulla joined the theater and found many friends there prior to becoming a general in the Jugurthine War. At this time, and again, once you became a general, um, you were you were destined to lead somehow. You were destined to lead. You were destined to hold the high spot in the government. Today we have a separation between the armed forces and the political class, right? Here in the United States and pretty much everywhere else in the world, the armies, they swear allegiance to the political class. They follow what the political class says and has them do. Back in those days, it was not that way. Generals oftentimes uh, became politicians. Uh, and it's just that people liked it. They liked generals. They liked people, men of action. They liked men that could go out and conquer lands. All right. So anyway, at this time, Marius began to quarrel with Sulla. Marius, who wanted to capture Jugurtha, asked Bocchus, son-in-law of Jugurtha, to hand them over. As Marius failed, Sulla, a general of Marius at the time, in a dangerous enterprise, went himself to Bocchus and convinced Bocchus to hand Jugurtha over to him. This was very provocative to Marius, since many of his enemies were encouraging Sulla to oppose Marius. Despite this, Marius was elected for 5 consecutive consulships from 104 to 100 BC, right, to 100 before the birth of Christ. As Rome needed a military leader to defeat the Cimbri and the Teutones, who were threatening Rome. So again, here you see two guys that have got armies. They're generals. Marius was a consul and a general, both at the same time. This just would not happen today. We understand, most people that study political science understand that if you have a government led by the military, you're going to have war. That's what military people do. They have war, and just because someone is a general doesn't necessarily mean that they understand how to run a government. And we do. We have there are still a few governments out there that are, Myanmar for one. The army, the military in Myanmar, just if you've been following up, um, kicked out the president, the prime minister, the president, and they took over. The army took over. They conducted a coup. What's called a coup, And they had elections. Aung San Suu Kyi won the election, but they didn't want her because she was bringing on too many democratic ideals and things like that. So they kicked her out. They At first they put her in jail, then they put her at home where she was confined to her home, and now they're running the place. Now the military, you got a general who is the president in a way. He's the leader of the country, and they're having all kinds of problems over there. People don't want the military running the country. They want politicians. They want professional politicians. In spite of corruption, a lot of times politicians are corrupt, but to people, it's better to have a politician than to have a military who doesn't understand what the people need. They're only, the military's only ideal is to have weapons. They don't want to buy. They don't want to create or rather construct or build a hospital. They want to build 50,000 tanks, and that does nothing to the people. So this was one of the first squabbles. Um, so let's not. Let me see. Marius died in 86 BC due to age and poor health, just a few months after seizing power. Cinna exercised absolute power until his death in 18. So we're going through the different councils that, and again, as I say, there's so many: Lucius Cornelius Cinna and Marius and this guy and that guy. There's so many of these councils over a period of hundreds and hundreds of years that it's very difficult to remember each and every one of them. The thing that you have to do is remember the main events and some of the main people that were the protagonist of these events. They were the ones that got these events going. You know, got these events going. If there is somebody that you see that um, that could be interesting to you, I suggest you look him up in the internet. Google his name, and there'll be lots and lots of stuff. Remember what I told you, and that is that there are people out there with PhDs in Rome, and they're still studying. They're still researching because it's such a huge, huge period of time, and so much stuff happened in Rome. Um, okay, so now after this civil war, uh, the first triumvirate uh, became a reality, right? Rome went through some of these councils, and but as people, as some of these generals and these people of influence gained power, as they gained an army. There's nothing you could do in Rome unless you had an army. As they gained an army and they gained power, uh, there were squabbles. And in order to avoid squabbles that would tear at the fabric of Rome, uh, the talk began that power should be shared among these powerful people. Right? Power should be shared among these powerful people, and needless to say, it never worked. It just never really worked. Any sort of sharing of power, um, there was no way. Pompey would be jealous of Caesar because Caesar took over Spain, what is now Spain, and Caesar would be jealous of Crassus because Crassus had money. He came from a rich family, and Crassus would be jealous of Pompey because So there would be all this jealousy and all of this friction between these people, and that would lead to civil war. No matter what. Um, and that is why, as politics has evolved over the years, people have tried to create systems that, number one, separate the military from the government, uh, where people are in power for a certain period of time, and then they're supposed to get off and allow the next person to come in. That sort of uh, logical and orderly approach to changing, from one government to the next has allowed many countries, many areas of the world to to have stability, to avoid civil wars, to have stability. The problem has always been when one person is too hungry for for power, wants too much, and that's when they want to take over the world, or they want to be the most powerful leader in their country, and that type of stuff. Anyway, the first triumvirate of ancient Rome was an uneasy alliance between the three titans, Julius Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, which from 60 BCE, before current era, before Christ, until 53 BCE, dominated the politics of the Roman Republic. Alliances have always been a part of history, whether one looks to the unification of Sparta and Athens against the Persians, right? If you remember, uh, if you took my Greek uh, empire class, uh, the Persians were a threat and were always attacking Greece. But Greece were not unified. Each city was its own little government. So Sparta and Athens, who had been at odds with one another, they unified so that they could push the Persians back, push them back into the desert. Uh, so these alliances have always been around, and that is, um, in the 5th century BC, or the Allied forces of the Triple Entente in World War One, right? And the Allies during World War Two. So these, you know, alliances have always been around. Excuse me. Ancient Rome was no different. And unstable, excuse me a second, let me get rid of a little bar down here that is always very annoying. Um, an unstable republic and a near civil war brought three men to set aside their differences and even a contempt for one another to join forces and dominate the government of Rome, even controlling elections for nearly a decade. So they got together, and the way that they divided it, actually,
We can't hear you.
hear me?
Yes. I can't hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So anyway, so as I was saying, there's always been alliances, right? And we had alliances during the First World War. We had alliances during the Second World War, right? The Allies fought the Germans and the Axis, and all. So there's always been alliances. and there were alliances back then. And these three, the way that they had divided uh, their duties was that they Caesar had the north through the Gaul area and into Spain and into England, and Crassus had somewhere else, and Pompey had all the way over, like into Egypt and things like that. That's kind of the way that they had divided things. Uh, but one of these three would eventually rise to a lot more prominence than the others. And this in itself was a problem. This in itself was the problem. And that always happened. Whenever you have something like this, there's going to be one that outshines the other, and then the others they're going to get jealous, and things are going to happen. The three men who would change the face of Roman politics were Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, which we know as Pompey, Marcus Licinius Crassus, which we know as Crassus, and Gaius Julius Caesar. Each man had his own personal reason for joining together, realizing that he could not achieve it alone. While each had attained personal success, he wanted even more glory and dignity. That's what they wanted. And this has always been a problem. So in 60 BCE, the three men combined their resources, set aside their personal differences. Crassus, although one of the wealthiest men in Rome, despised Pompey and seized control of the state. However, despite good intentions and personal achievement aside, the union was not very strong, was tenuous, was tenuous. These three guys they were gonna have a problem eventually, and they did. Although he considered himself a friend to both Caesar and Pompey, Cicero, who disliked the Optimates. The Optimates were the emperor, the senators, as much as they did, was supposed to join in the triumvirate, even though they respected his oratory skills and made regular use of his legal services. He still cherished, and this guy here, Cicero, that might be one of those people you might want to research. You know, he was a kind of an interesting character. Made regular use of his legal services. He still cherished the old aristocratic patrician values, even though many of them didn't respect him. Fortunately for Cicero, his exposure of Catiline conspiracy and opposition to the conservatives brought about his exile. It would take an appeal to Pompey and Caesar that allowed him to return to Rome in 57 BCE. So, as I say, you might want to read a little bit about it. Eventually, the differences between the alliance members and their personal greed would spell the triumvirate's doom, like I've said. Personal greed, jealousy, all of that stuff. Eventually, uh, you know, these guys were going to go after each other. For now, however, the gang saw an opportunity and took it. But this triumvirate did not come together overnight. The alliance had its beginning a decade earlier. And that the beginning was when they realized that, you know, enough of civil wars. Let's try to make peace here. But again, as I say, the triumvirate begins to unravel. In 73 BC, Thracian named Spartacus led a revolt. Now, Spartacus, if you here's a movie that you should watch. It's called Spartacus, and it might be on YouTube. You know, let me see. Give me a second here. Let me see because I highly recommend you watch this movie. It's a very exciting movie, and if you look at it from the perspective of a historical perspective, you can kind of, you can get a little bit of an idea of what was going on around that time. Uh, the movie's called Spartacus. Spartacus. Yeah, 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 yeah. Movie. Let's see. I spelled it wrong. Spartacus. Ah, Spartacus movie. Well, the Gladiator. It's somewhat based on Spartacus. Let's not do this one. There was another one. Let's see. Right here. This one. This is a show, a TV show, and then this one here with Kirk Douglas. This one is a little bit more historically accurate than the others. You can also watch a documentary on Spartacus. Let's see. Barbarians Rising, Spartacus Rebellion. This is a documentary. This is not a movie, it's a documentary. You might want to watch it as well. Um, but any one of those. Don't watch the one by Russell Crowe. It's a nice movie, but it's not really Spartacus. Uh, this one here with Kirk Douglas, which is 1960. Um, you might have to buy it, uh, but I think it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile watching it. Um, I remember watching it when I was very young, and it really is a great show. Anyway, so in 73 BCE, a Thracian named Spartacus later led a revolt at a gladiator school at Capua, a city south of Rome. He and his followers went on a rampage throughout Italy. The revolt continued for almost 2 years, defying the Roman forces sent against them, so that in 71 BCE, Crassus was sent by the Roman Senate to finally suppress the uprising. Eventually, Spartacus was killed, and 6,000 of his followers were crucified. Imagine that, along the Appian Way. The Appian Way is a road that starts in the south of Italy and it works all the way up uh, to what do you call it? To Rome. So if you got, Italy, it's like this, it's like a boat, right? It's called a boat. And Rome is here, right? The Appian Way kind of goes like this, and it starts over here, right? And that was a road that the Romans built in order to keep the colonies, not the colonies, but their cities. They had cities that were part of their system that were here. And, who is here? Uh, the Greeks are here, the Macedonians are here. All of these enemies of Italy, of Rome, were here, and and this city would get invaded often. So by them building a road, which they called the Appian Way, that made it all the way down to this group of cities that were down here, they could kind of keep them safe. They could keep them safe, right? They could keep them safe, and they could have enough soldiers there to sort of protect them, right? Um, although most of the praise, let me see, road between Rome and to serve as a warning to others. Although most of the praise should have gone to the military leadership of Crassus, Pompey, who had recently returned from Spain, attempted to steal most of the credit for the defeat, even though his only accomplishment was to round up the stragglers. Afterwards, both men disobeyed Senate orders and refused to disband their armies. This is a problem. If you got a guy who is a politician and is also a general, and he's got an army, and the Senate says, hey, disband your army, we don't need you anymore. And they say, no, I'm not going to disband my army. That's a problem. That means that this guy wants to get into a fight somewhere along the line. Although Pompey actually scorned the Republican government, The defeat of Spartacus and his followers ensured both men were named co-consuls in 70 BC. Crassus never forgot Pompey's arrogance and always sought a military command where he alone would achieve glory. So again, you see, this time triumvirate, it was going to fail. I don't care what anybody says, it was going to fail. It was going to fail because too much greed, too much jealousy. Problems in the east, piracy for one, caused a shortage of food in Rome. In 67 BCE, Pompey was sent eastward to not only suppress the presence of pirates on the high seas, but also confront Mithridates of Pontus, who posed a dangerous threat to the power of Rome in Asia Minor by continually attacking Roman provinces. And this is, well, this is one of the reasons why they built the Appian Way, to keep soldiers, able to go to certain areas and fend off um, pirates and aggressive people and things like that. His eventual death would bring power to his heirs and peace with Rome. From 66 to 63 BCE, Pompey and his army marched from the Caucasus Mountains in the north to the Red Sea and would redraw the map in the Eastern Mediterranean. He organized the provinces. He did a whole bunch of stuff. But anyway, let's try to move ahead. And then let's talk about Caesar very briefly. We're going to, I'll tell you what, why don't we stop here because you guys, we've gone over a little bit. You guys, I'm sure, have other things to do. Uh, so let's pick it up here. In the meantime, um, does anybody have any questions? Any questions whatsoever? So this is class 3, right? End of class number 3. Um, does anybody have any questions? Am I making a clear case of the history of Rome? Do you understand it a little bit better now, at least up to where we're at? Uh, or is there anything that you would like me to go into a little bit more? I'll be happy to do that next time. If you have any questions now, we can take another couple of minutes and answer your questions. Um, but as I said, remember the important events. Remember the very important people. Remember the track of the Roman Empire, or the Roman people. Starting as a monarchy, republic, empire, jealousy among leaders, a weird sort of a setup between the military and the politician, where there was no clear defining line between a military person and a politician. Um, how it is that, just history repeats itself and it will continue to repeat itself. Anyway, so having said all of that, and considering that you guys do not have any more questions for today, I will say the words that I always say at the end of the class. They are,
See you later, alligator.
see you later, alligator.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.